Hi, I'm Kate Childs from FMCG Institute, bringing you another roundtable discussion. In this video, we'll be covering some important issues that have come out of our recent forum discussions internationally, including range rationalisation, the surge in e-commerce, new costs that have come out of COVID, as well as lessons learned during the lockdown and other organisational insights. As usual, I'm going to put the timestamps in the description box below on YouTube, so you'll be able to jump around if there's a specific topic you're looking for. I hope you enjoy the discussion.
Hi, I'm Kate Childs from FMCG Institute. Welcome to another roundtable. Today I'm joined with Mark Childs, Chairman of the Institute, and Jim Flannery, Executive Director of North America. How are you going, guys?
Hi, Kate.
Good afternoon, evening.
Good to get together again. I know you're in Barcelona and things are getting a bit easier there. I'm still stuck here in Australia, although good news is it looks like I've got a flight for mid-July, if it leaves, getting back home. So, you know, wish me luck.
Yeah, that's great. So, yeah, Barcelona, Sydney. I'm in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. There are worse places than the three of us are located to be stuck for a while.
Yeah, I guess so. It sounds a bit churlish for me to be complaining, and I'm not really. We've had a good time here, actually. I've got a nice big garden here, and I've had a chance to get out there and do a little bit of gardening while I've been here. So that's been nice.
Yeah, good.
Anyway, so over to you, Kate. Let's discuss some current issues.
Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to discuss, Mark Baum, Chief Customer Officer of FMI, was kind enough to brief our US forum members recently, and he raised some important issues. First, he said that the focus on range rationalisation will be renewed. Surely this isn't a bad thing. I mean, we know that many categories have too many SKUs, so some simplification would benefit the whole industry. What are your thoughts on that? Jim?
Yeah, I think this is going to get right at that age-old dilemma of efficiency versus variety for the consumer. Right? I mean, as an industry, we've struggled with this for eons. We tend to bring the range down, and then over time, for some good, some not good reasons, those ranges tend to expand. I think what we've gone through has really been interesting from a manufacturer standpoint. The need to rationalize the range, not because of a change in consumer demand, but just because you needed to focus on the SKUs that you could manufacture and get them out the door. The retailers, on the other hand, they had no choice, right? They had a shelf with 40 different varieties. They were only able to acquire 10 of the items that the consumers want, so they brought it down. So we've got this forced range rationalization, and I think there are a lot of puts and calls about how that's going to change things moving forward.
Yeah, I was really interested in what Mark had to say on this. There's been talk about range rationalization for year after year by retailers. As I said to him at the time, I think that this is, at least in part, ruled by dysfunction. Retailers announce that they're going to cut the range by, let's say, 5%, but then the buyers get involved and each of them is managing their category, and manufacturers start writing checks to keep their SKUs in the range, and before you know it, you've got really nowhere. I've seen this go round and round year after year.
Yeah, Mark, in my history, I think with P&G, one of the things that I did in my career is I was part of the team that ran the Hawaiian Punch business, which is a juice-based business. When we purchased that business, it was nothing but Fruit Juicy Red, right? So it was the single flavor. And a simple way to grow the business, we launched Fruit Juicy Green, Fruit Juicy Yellow, Fruit Juicy Orange, Fruit Juicy Blue, right? So it's and you get that immediate pipeline launch, and then over time, the things start to dwindle down. But there's some bad behaviors on both sides of the equation, I think, from extended ranges. Now there's a flip side to that. Right. And I think if you talk to 90% of the brand managers, 99% of the brand managers, they'll always tell you that there's a consumer rationale for why this flavor or this variant is needed in the marketplace. And I think that's true, right? So these brands are needed, but it's that dilemma between SKU efficiency, not only from a manufacturing standpoint, but in a store, and the ability to meet consumer demand. So I've got an interesting take on some of Mark's comments. I would just let you continue for a minute, and I'll come back to something else he said on that.
Yes, well, I just wanted to say this really takes me back maybe 10 years, Jim. You remember when you and I worked on that New Ways of working together project with Consumer Goods Forum, and we developed a model for better collaboration to focus on the shopper and a whole lot of stuff like that. The thing I remember was sitting in a restaurant with Franz Muller, who was at Metro at the time. He was the MD of Metro, and your old boss, Mariano Martin, was sitting in Cologne, Germany, planning one of those meetings of New Ways of Working Together. And I said to Franz, why are you involved in this? And he said, because we know that we're carrying far too many SKUs, but because of the way manufacturers behave so inconsistently, we can't solve that problem on our own. So we want a more consistent way to engage with manufacturers in order to remove that dysfunction. And, you know, that conversation has stuck with me ever since because I keep on seeing it. And I think that kind of dysfunction continues to be there. So, you know, I hope Mark is right. And I do think, as you said, Kate, I do think it's good for the industry if we get some range rationalization and some efficiency. I just don't think with current practices it's going to happen.
Yeah, but so on the flip side of that, Mark also mentioned the surge in e-commerce, and he kind of had a throwaway comment that maybe what we'll see is an in-store environment really focused on power SKUs and efficiency, but then an alternate channel to provide this unlimited range to consumers. Mark, as you and I have worked with some of the folks at Walmart Labs, they've been really clear. They want Walmart consumers to be able to buy anything at any time. And that doesn't mean it's in the store. They basically want to take a look at every product catalog that's out there. And if a consumer wants this unique flavor and this unique variant, they want to be able to supply that digitally. With what we've just gone through with the COVID-19 pandemic and everybody, masses of consumers purchasing digitally for the first time, they're going to learn that if they can't find an item in the store, they're going to be able to find that item in line. And if somehow that item met a unique need for them, they're going to go hunting for it. So I don't know how to predict where it's going to go, but I'm sure there's going to be some physical range rationalization that really gets at the effectiveness and efficiencies. I think as manufacturers take a look at how to power up their plants more effectively, they'll do that range rationalization. But there are going to be items that have unique consumer needs that I think the consumer is still going to want to find. And I think this whole availability of products online, either through a pure play digital operator or frankly direct to consumer from the manufacturer, I think that's going to fill a different niche. Yeah.
Look, I thought I agree. And I think that was an important comment that Mark made. So I'm glad you mentioned it.
Some of the, if I'm in Amazon, obviously if I'm purchasing on Amazon, I've got everything. If I'm purchasing on Walmart, their e-commerce play allows me to get anything. At least here in the US, a lot of traditional retailers haven't really created their own e-commerce platform. They're creating e-commerce capabilities like Instacart. All right. So what Instacart does, while we were here quarantined, early on, I had some people here who were exposed, so we didn't want them to go out there high risk. So we ordered from a local Kroger division on Instacart, which is really great. It's an e-commerce environment. I can get online. I can order what I want, but my choices are limited to what's in that store. So that's a different e-commerce execution that's not going to meet the needs of, all right, I'm effectively rationalizing my range in store, but I haven't created the capability for my consumer to get beyond that range through me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think that's definitely going to be the next evolution in retailing. One of the other points that Mark mentioned was that retailers' sales increase, but also their costs, and some one-off costs and some continuing costs that they may want suppliers to share in the future. So do you think that this is an issue that maybe industry bodies should be taking up and looking into if retailers press unrealistic demands?
Let me just comment on that first, Jim. We've been raising this in a couple of our forums with, some anxiety from manufacturers, frankly, because they also say their costs have dramatically increased, and many of them have had the double whammy of losing dramatic amounts of sales from some of their channels, impulse and food service in particular. So, if it gets to a point of comparing who costs the most in this and where the support should be, maybe manufacturers should be asking for some relief, because I suspect that their costs are bigger. I just wonder if somebody should be taking this up on their behalf.
Yeah, I certainly think it's worth making sure there are forums where these dialogues can take place. Ultimately, it comes down to the individual trading relationship between a retailer and manufacturer. But oftentimes where I think these trade associations or forums can create the need is we create that environment where we create a common language and we enable individual retailers and manufacturers to talk to each other, right? Hey, did you read this article? Did you hear about this? Let's talk about our costs. When it comes to who pays for incremental costs, again, in my experience, and it's both on the retailer and manufacturer side, there are a lot of entities that their costs go up, and the first thing they want to do is toss it over to the fence to their business partner. So a retailer's cost goes up, they want to put it on the manufacturer. Frankly, I've seen manufacturers whose costs go up or opportunistic things, and they throw it into pricing, and hoping that the retailer is going to take the price up and recover it. I don't know that a dialogue is ever going to resolve bad actors that do that, but I think a dialogue, the creation of a common language, I think that's what the new ways of working together framework frankly did. It created that space where retailers and manufacturers could have very honest conversations with each other about focusing on the consumer and the costs involved in that.
Well, I'm sure you remember, Jim, that very central to that was a discussion about shared KPIs. I mean, it came down to trust and shared purpose, right, which is pretty obvious. Well, and that's one of the things that Mark mentioned, that there's a need for, it was music to my ears, actually, that there was a need for common KPIs.
Right. In that whole approach to more in-depth joint business planning, the early steps is when you get together with a truly strategic business partner, and that's what's really necessary here. You share stuff with them. Here's what's happened to our costs. In our last forum or two calls ago, one of the participants from the manufacturer side was talking about the incremental costs that they have, right? So yeah, sales are up, but they typically would have one run in their plant, one cycle where they have 18 people working on the line. Well, in order to accommodate this, they're now running 3 different shifts with 6 people each. Well, that just tripled their costs. When you keep that open. So sharing that stuff, putting all the, here's the good, here's the, here's the things that we've had to accommodate. Those allow companies to make smarter, more fully informed choices how to work together. And in the end, a joint business plan has to meet the needs of both the retailer and the manufacturer, or it won't succeed.
Yeah. Let me just add to this. I think you're talking to some extent from a North American point of view, where the quality of collaboration is still pretty good. But there are some other parts of the world where there is a degree of collaboration going on. But boy, it must be difficult to achieve that in Europe right now, you know, with buying groups and strategic alliances like the one between Tesco and Carrefour. So we need to be a little bit careful in not generalizing right across the world. You know, I would love to see a higher quality level of collaboration, but it's not really being achieved in a lot of those markets.
Well, I think that's probably a discussion for a future, maybe a future more in-depth conversation that we have. But I want to move on now and turn to the lessons that companies have that they've been learning during the lockdown. I want to start with training because at first glance, I would have thought that this would have been a casualty, but that's not what clients are telling us.
Yes, I mean, yes, you're right. And we keep hearing from clients that training has been a winner. I mean, there was first of all the necessity to occupy people during the most severe part of lockdowns. And so people, you know, companies wheeled out whatever training programs they had on the shelf that they could run for people, particularly to occupy people like field sales personnel who were grounded in many markets. But yeah, I keep hearing about, you know, experiences of running classes on Zoom that have worked extremely well, even to the point of being able to engage people internationally in one Zoom training program.
Yeah.
I'm working with a company here in the U.S. That is over the past couple of years have really focused on training and understand that if their people are better equipped, they get better results. They're a DSD company, so they've got thousands of people out there. Their kind of manager route relationship is somewhere between 1 to 25, 1 to 30. And what they were doing is a process that saw that manager physically be with that individual at least once a month. And that was really tough, right? I mean, if you imagine you've got 25 people and you have to get with each 25 people once a month, there's not a lot of time for you to breathe and do anything else but be out there. And what they've found, because those people are still in the store, right? They're direct store delivery. But using technology and Zoom, they've been able to create much greater connectivity.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to what I was saying, Jim, and just reinforcing what you're saying, companies are learning better ways to use online like Zoom to conduct their training. One of the interesting comments I've heard from people is they realized that even conducting large meetings, it's helpful to have an expert facilitator to run them. Because all of us need to learn how to be more effective on camera than we've been before. You know, making it more interesting, being in control of it and so on. And in fact, I've got a question for Kate on this. Kate, I know that you jumped on this very quickly to finish your MBA that you've sort of neglected for the last few years after your move to Barcelona. So, of course, Zoom training gave you a chance to focus again on this and wrap up your last couple of units. And that's great. I'm glad you're doing that. But how have those sessions worked? What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, so yeah, I think everybody's been on a learning curve using Zoom and the like. But I'd make a couple of observations. So the first one is that the larger the group you have, the more the facilitator has to actively manage the discussion. So to me, it seems a little bit like the bystander effect, where the more people that there are, the less people feel that they have an individual responsibility to participate in the discussion. So bringing people in by name becomes very important. The second point that I'd make is that if people don't turn their cameras on, right there, that immediately changes the dynamic, because there's just that level of connecting and communication is gone. And then it becomes as effective as an old sort of teleconference that you do by phone. And I think you'd probably agree with me that they're not that effective for a lot of things. And then the final point I'd make is that when you're on Zoom, you're basically in a close-up. And so if you kind of have to be on the whole time. And doing that for a number of hours at a time is exhausting.
Yeah, we keep hearing from clients that there's a fatigue factor, Zoom fatigue. It's probably going to be the word of the year, or the phrase of the year. So a number of companies have told us that they've adopted a practice of only meeting for 45 or 50 minutes at a time and allowing people at least a little bit of time between the next one to just for downtime to get a coffee or, visit the loo or whatever. And on that point about lots of people, we also hear companies telling us that they're aiming to have maximum 10 people on a call, unless, of course, it's an internal town hall or something like that. Jim, have you got any?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Kate and I were talking before you came on, and I think that this remote learning, it's not easy, right? So I think because people are used to being on conference calls, right? So you've got the speakerphone on, but you're reading your mail, you're doodling around, you're kind of sort of paying attention when the camera's on, right? And I think that's a huge enabler in this. You've got to pay attention, and you've got to be on. So I actually think that's helping the effectiveness of it. There's probably Zoom fatigue because people do have to be on, right? Yeah. They've got to listen, they've got to be ready to respond, and they can't be zoned out doing something else. So
yeah,
it's a balance.
It's sort of your eyes starts to track, and people know you're reading the emails.
Right. So no, I do think it's helping the productivity. It's important, Mark, to your point that that they're pithy, they're contained, but I do think they're effective.
Okay, so let's now take a look at early organizational strategic insights. Mark, one of the things we discussed with members is this idea of what you called tethered markets. So Australia and New Zealand, the US and Canada, the UK and Ireland, Greater China, Iberia. Do Zoom-style communications open up new possibilities here?
Well, I think it's a bit early to answer that, Kate. I think probably yes. First of all, I'm sure Canada would be horrified to be regarded as a tethered market. Look, there are quite a number of them in the world that are like that, where companies are going to rationalise. Definitely companies are managing Portugal from Madrid, for example. They're managing 3 or 4 Central European markets as one. And I think these things are going to get easier. I was talking to some of the clients in New Zealand about this, because there's been a long-term contentious issue. Should we put a full organisation in New Zealand, or should we just run a sales force there and manage all of the other support functions from Australia, just to keep the economies down, or keep the economies sensible? Almost inevitably, when you do that, you end up losing some market share. That's always been my observation. But maybe you don't have that market share cost issue so much. And maybe also, if I keep using the Australia-New Zealand example, maybe if you want to do category management support of both countries from one place, you might happen to have a great category manager in Auckland, and they're going to manage category strategy across the Tasman instead of managing it from Australia. I think that kind of issue is going to be asked about more and more. I think that's where we're headed. But it's a subject I'm sure we'll return to a little further down the track.
Yeah, Mark, in my experience, I think that there are really 3 factors that come to play as markets get tethered. In the market groupings that you talked about, almost inevitably, like the people in New Zealand report to the people in the U.S. In few exceptions, the people in Canada. The people in New Zealand report to Australia. The people in Canada report to the folks in the U.S. The people in Ireland report to the folks in London. So I think first and foremost is a financial factor. You remember when you and I first met, and I was the managing director of Australia and New Zealand, we had a full-fledged operation in New Zealand. We duplicated every single role in New Zealand that we had in Australia, and financially that just didn't make sense. Right? So I think that the primary driver is financial. The other two drivers, though, are really important, and this is what keeps them separate. Right? Number one is the trade flow. If the retailers in that market are different than the retailers in a centralized market, you need to have that autonomy and flexibility to manage that. As the retailers begin to blur lines, in Australia and New Zealand, some of the retailers, the ownership wound up going across the Tasman. That facilitates even more of that. And then the third is the consumer. It's interesting. I've been working on a big project in Canada, and the way I describe working with the folks up there. So I work with the manufacturing community in the U.S. and I work with their counterparts in Canada, and they're talking with their consumers, and they're fiercely Canadian. All right, I don't want to even just say they're Canadian; they're fiercely Canadian. And unless it's relevant for Canadian consumers, they want no part of it. And the worst thing you can do is say, "Oh, we're doing it in the U.S. Let's take it to Canada." No. Right?
I agree.
The very first approach is no, and then you get through it.
Yeah, well, I agree. And New Zealanders are fiercely New Zealanders, and Irish are fiercely Irish. But I'd even say, even if the same retailer is in both places, and that is certainly so between the UK and Ireland, with Tesco in both places, Aldi in both places, I still think that you're going to have to address those retailers and their expectations in situ. Mm-hmm. But I guess my hypothesis is maybe with this kind of supercharged communications across whatever that stretch of water is, or across the border, maybe that can be done more easily. I hear from the satellite countries all the time that their experience is that they're an afterthought in any of the marketing planning or customer marketing or category management planning that goes on. And that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
But when you can sit in on every meeting, when it's a Zoom meeting, maybe that'll change.
Yeah, I think it will change the relationship, right? So rather than somebody flying in and spending the day with me, telling me that I should run my business maybe differently than I think I should run it, the conversations on Zoom, actually, I think it's more empowering, frankly. So if I'm in New Zealand or I'm in Canada, and now the relationship with my manager is more virtual, I actually am empowered probably to do more to succeed.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I've also had sales directors say to me they've never been closer than they are now with their scattered sales force, because they're talking to them more often, and they're talking to them face to face virtually through
right.
Zoom. So yeah, so I think this has some way to run. I think we'll learn that we can collaborate as an organization more readily through this than we have done in the past.
Yeah. Look, the other big organisational topic that was raised in forums recently is productivity, both during the lockdown and in the uncertain times ahead. And Jim, your old company, P&G, their CEO recently said that productivity is now as critical a focus as innovation. What do you make of that?
Yeah, from my 36 years with P&G, I think productivity has always been one of the primary focal points of the company. So innovation is clearly the leader, but companies tend to get fatter over time. And we go through these cycles. So you get more and more resources, and then we have a big productivity push, and it comes back in, and then over time, you get that little creep. What I think is really changed here is companies have been forced to take productivity steps further than they've ever had to do before, and it's kind of sort of worked well. You know, I was talking to somebody yesterday who works for a company that went through, you know, in the US we called it the 3G effect, where that venture capitalist comes in and the first thing they do, I mean, they're entirely focused on productivity. And they cut things down to the point where it becomes ineffective, and then they start bringing them back. But yeah, I do think productivity, you know, moving forward is going to be as important as it's ever been, and we've learned a different kind of lesson this time.
One of the conversations we've been having with clients is that they say that individuals are often saying they're much more productive when they're working away from the office. And that's mainly because they're focused on brain work that, you know, it's very hard to perform when you're being constantly interrupted. One of the fascinating things that came out of this discussion very recently is one general manager who said all his people had now come back to the office, is that he's disappointed at how they've lost the very clear focus they had working on Zoom. He said, I almost wish that we could just go back to working from home, because in that period, we made some very strict strategic priority choices, and people followed them and were very focused on the things that mattered most. And now they've come back to the office, and we seem to have just sort of drifted back to the way we used to be. And that degree of critical focus has just sort of melted away. Now, that's one of the very early ones to have returned to the office. And I just wonder how many will have a similar experience.
Yeah, you know, you and I touched on this a couple of weeks ago. I think that there's, you know, like anything, if you go too extreme to this side or too extreme to this side, you lose the forest for the trees. I think the digital engagement like this does provide a tremendous amount of focus. So you get 6-8 people on a call, you're having a debate about what you want to do, you make a decision and then go, and that's really productive. But what's missing is the office interaction where somebody said, boy, I listened to that conversation, and, you know, the more I thought about it, I don't think we're going in the right direction. And so they bounce different ideas around that. That's very not productive, right? You just made a decision to go in this direction, but in an office environment, you do build that ability to take a step back, think things through a little bit, and then bring back alternate thoughts. Like, I know we've decided to go there, but hey, the three of us were talking, and, you know, maybe if we went a little bit this way, it'd be better. So it's that balance. You know, as a manager, I would love to be in a position to say, okay, this is where we're going, go, and I don't want to hear anything else from anybody anymore. And in a digital environment, that tends to happen. In the physical environment, you continue to have that churn. Yeah, sometimes it's bad.
How do you have those unstructured communications and interactions? It's
right, and it's that balance, right? Because if you get a group of people to say this is where we're going to go, and then you foster an environment where any one or two individuals can come back and undermine the decision, that's bad. All right, but how do you create an environment where you really have that healthy debate? And sometimes in a Zoom meeting, I'm not sure you can have the healthy debate as much as you have when you've got some of these unstructured conversations.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I agree with you, but I wonder if people will learn to be more effective through Zoom meetings as time goes on. Now, look, there certainly is an element here that I've often talked about that I call organizational drag. And that is, when you run a big organization, there is leakage of productivity. Some of it is bad, but some of it is necessary. And that's the collaboration. That's the second guessing. It's the, reviewing objectives. It's all the things that are needed that don't, you remember I talked at our last discussion about remembering the old idea of either you make something or you sell something or you help someone who does. Well, it's not as easy as that. Organizations need a whole lot of other stuff to work. You know, they need performance reviews for people. They need grievance systems. They need time for training that's just about how things work and, you know, how to processes work and so on. all of those things have a tendency to suck on productivity to a degree, but they're needed. So I agree with you that we couldn't just run a business on Zoom. It would just...
And I'd just add to that, Mark.
Other dysfunction would develop. Sorry, Kate.
Yeah, what you've just described is the sort of the culture aspects of a business. Yeah. And I think that's something else that we've heard a lot of members say, that, you know, how do you build culture? You're just doing your meetings and you're not having those other peripheral contacts with people.
Yeah, so my one caveat on all of this is we can't expect things are going to be the same, but we don't know how this is going to play out yet. And I think the existing culture, as you refer to, Kate, in organisations will influence how this now evolves to a new form of organisation. But I don't think we're going back to exactly where we were. Some will try, but I think we'll discover that as this general manager told me, there are some good things that have come out of this that we've got to try and capture, that have to do with, you know, efficient decision making and clear organisational focus.
Okay, well, I would like to just close on that then. I think all of these topics that we've spoken about today will continue to develop. And I suppose it's going to give us a lot to talk about in the weeks and months ahead.
Yes, well, it will keep coming back onto our forum agendas, I'm sure, as companies evolve and learn how to deal with this stuff. Because I'm pretty sure that the pandemic is not going away anytime soon. And even if it does, for countries that have got it under control reasonably well, the anxiety about a return is going to change the way people function. But anyway, thanks, Kate. Thanks for your facilitation. Jim, good to talk to you.
All right, Kate, take care.
Yeah, good to speak to you all.
See you in a few weeks.
Stay well. Bye-bye.